Let's dive into our second article. If you have not already, go get a pen or a pencil so you could begin annotating as you read along. You have the opportunity to stop the video when you are annotating if you find something that you want to question, react to, or a statement that you feel as though is important. Remember, as you're annotating, you're taking notes on the side as well. Let's begin. Primary sources: colonialism's effect on the Kuba Kingdom of the Congo. Editor's notes: William Henry Shepherd was a missionary and explorer in Africa. He was the son of a slave and always dreamed of visiting Africa. Shepherd arrived in the Congo in 1890 and stayed for 20 years. He explored the Kasai River area and met some of the most remote groups of people in the region. Shepherd became very close to the Kuba Kingdom, also called the Bakuba Kingdom, a powerful civilization deep in the Congo. In 1892, Shepherd became the first foreigner to enter their capital. He spoke their language. Shepherd stayed for 4 months and took notes of everything he saw. This is from his book, Presbyterian Pioneers in Congo, and news articles. The capital in sight. We could see in the distance thousands of banana and palm trees. We were escorted by a group of Bakuba who cried out, "Masenge, Masenge." It meant meaning capital, capital in their language. A man was sent to tell the king, and hundreds of people came out to meet us. A grand affair. Early in the morning, we heard the blast of horns. Soon, 2 sturdy Bakuba with red kilts and feathers in their hats arrived. They brought me to the king, Lukenga. Thousands of villagers sat on the grass in the big square. King Lukenga, his high officials, and about 30 of his wives sat on the eastern side. As we appeared, a great shout went up from the people. The king's servants ran and spread leopard skins along the ground. The king arose from his throne and stretched his hand out to me. He greeted me with these words, "Wini," meaning "you have come." I bowed low, clapped my hands in front of him, and answered, "Ndini, Nyimi," or "I have come, king." The royal dance. The king's sons entered the square and danced, waving their big knives in the air. The king's great chair was made of tusks of ivory, and his feet rested upon lion skin. He was more than 6 feet tall. He wore a high crown of eagle feathers on his head and a belt decorated with shells and beads. His bracelets and anklets were also made of shells. The king wore a pleasant smile and looked like he was 80 years old. The king's town. The town had wide, straight streets. Around each house was a courtyard and a high fence made of palm leaves. In some of the yards, there were trees with blooming flowers. How they get married. A young man sees a girl whom he likes. He sends her presents like bananas, plantains, peanuts, dried fish, or grasshoppers. She also sends him presents. They meet, laugh, and talk together. He asks her to marry him if there is no one else she loves. Industries. Blacksmiths make axes, hoes, knives, and spears. Others made mats, rugs, baskets, hats, and nets. Bakuba culture. I grew very fond of the Bakuba. They were dignified, graceful, brave, and honest. They have a great knowledge of weaving, embroidery, wood carving, and metalworking. The origin of the Bakuba. They came from the far north and defeated other tribes. The Bakuba says the first man and woman were let down from the skies by a rope. They untied themselves, and then the rope was drawn up. There are about 10,000 Bakuba in the capital and about 400,000 Bakuba overall. Children of nature. I spent hours playing with the little folks and trying to find out what they were thinking about. The kids had a name for the sun and moon and stars. The sun was the father of the heavens, the moon was his wife, and the stars were their children. After the sun sets, a large canoe paddles it around on the great river. Editor's note: the world in which the Kuba lived was about to change. King Leopold II of Belgium took control of the Congo and named it Congo Free State. He forced the Africans in the Congo to produce ivory and rubber. Leopold sent Belgian soldiers there and paid local tribes to force people to gather rubber. Congolese worked under terrible conditions and were practically slaves. In 1900, the Los Angeles Herald newspaper reported that many villages were destroyed. It was witnessed by Shepherd and another missionary, Mr. Vass. The massacre carried out by the Zapo-Zaps tribe, who the Belgian had paid to be their allies. The Reverend W. H. Shepherd found that 14 villages have been destroyed by fire and looted. He saw 47 bodies lying around the camp. The Belgians ordered the raid because the Africans could not pay the extremely high taxes. Mr. Vass says the whole country is destroyed and not a village is left standing. It is the middle of the rainy season and there are probably more than 50,000 people without shelter. Editor's note: 6 years after Shepherd had first visited the Kuba, the Belgians attacked their capital. The Kuba people rose up in revolt and burned Belgian trading posts. About 180 Kuba were shot dead by the Congo state troops. The Casa Herald was a newsletter published by the American Presbyterian Congo Mission. In January 1908, it had an article by Shepherd. He describes how the Kuba kingdom had changed. These hardworking men and women were always free. Only a few years ago, travelers saw them living happily with their wives and children. But within these last 3 years, how changed they are. Their farms are covered in weeds, and their king is practically a slave. Even their children cry for bread. Armed guards force them to spend their days and nights in the forest making rubber. They receive very little pay and cannot live on what they make. Editor's note: after Shepherd's article was published, a British official went to the Congo to investigate. His report caused a big protest and eventually forced the Belgians to treat the Congolese somewhat better. However, Belgium continued to mine the region's gold, copper, and diamonds. Congo did not become an independent country until 1960. The Kuba kingdom never really recovered, but the Kuba still exists. Today, their king is Kat-Amukika III. Shepherd returned to the United States and spoke about the Kuba and the horrors of colonialism. He was the pastor of Grace Presbyterian Church in Louisville, Kentucky, until he died in 1927.